Okay, Purple World Podcast. Today we've got Will coming on and talking about what are we talking about? This is a subject I know nothing about.
Fiction Ken is what I'm talking about. How do I do this?
Well, you use the notes
I
to
know
prompt
this.
yourself.
Okay.
So what is that? Like, in order to understand what fiction kin
Okay.
is, we need to understand what kin is in general, right?
Yep. Kin in general is basically it is a spiritual, metaphysical, or other type of experience where you connect to something inhuman or something that might be deemed not real.
So, like, what would be some examples of that?
Kinning a character, feeling akin with an animal, feeling akin with a mythical creature. I assume that even kinning objects is possible.
Okay. All right.
If we're abiding by the laws of this, then kinning objects is very much possible.
So it's like a spiritual connection to something that isn't innately human, but you like feel it's important to you or a part of you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That makes sense to me so far.
Kinning is usually kinning is usually you choose to kin something, and then being a kin is necessarily not a choice. Kinning is something that is fluid and can change. You can choose to stop at any time. Being a kin is usually something that doesn't change. It's permanent. It stays.
So I could be like, I really like giraffes and possums are my two favorite animals. I could be like, I'm spiritually like got a nest of possums in my rib cage, right? But doesn't necessarily mean I like am a kin.
Yeah.
A possum kin or giraffe kin or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Not
that's
necessarily. If you choose to kin them, then it doesn't necessarily mean you are one, but you're choosing to connect with this in order to feel just because it feels right to you.
yeah. I definitely feel like possums describe me.
You are 7 possums in a human flesh mech.
It's exactly like a well disguised burlap sack, and I'm just
Yes.
one giant possum with lots of babies clinging to it.
Right.
So
Kinning is basically where you choose to have something be a part of your identity, whereas being kin is something that you will realize and then sticks with you for the rest of your life. It's not necessarily something that is like it doesn't usually change.
okay, so is that how people, I guess, know the difference between like, oh, I'm kinning this versus like this is fundamentally part of who I am?
I would say, yeah, there are some exceptions, like fiction flickers, which are where I'll get into that later.
Right. So in order to understand that, I think we need to understand what a fiction kin is.
Yeah. A fiction kin is, it falls under the umbrella of other kin, which, like I said, is the spiritual or metaphysical idea of relating to or connecting to something that doesn't necessarily exist in this world. And fiction kin is specifically with characters, fictional characters. So it is, fortunately or unfortunately, for better or for worse, not a choice. It's something that you realize and it sticks with you for the rest of your life. There are some exceptions, but it's a tricky topic to kind of conceptualize.
So what would an exception look like, I guess?
Fiction flicker, for example,
Okay.
it's where it flickers in and flickers out. I've found it a lot with hyperfixations and neurodiverse people, but again, we'll get into that later. It can be a choice with things like coping links or fiction hearted. It's kind of a merge between kinning and being a kin, where coping links are you choose to kin a character in order to help you cope if the character, for example, has similar experiences or is like a person you want to be, and fiction hearted is where you choose to connect to a character in order to kind of just have fun, I guess.
Okay, so I've seen at least like either some of my students or like me, I've connected to characters maybe that not have similar experiences, but I'm like I want to incorporate like some of this person's confidence or whatever into, or like their sense of humor into my personality, and then like I'll be like, oh, I want to channel like Fox Mulder's sense of humor in this crowd because whatever. So it's just kind of a mirroring experience, like, oh, I relate with this versus
there are terms that come from both inside the community and outside of the community, and some of the terms can be like interchangeable, like choosing to kin something can be akin with fiction hearted, for example. Akin. But it can be a choice at times, not always though. Usually when you use the label fiction kin specifically, which is technically an umbrella term with other labels underneath it, but if you use the term fiction kin, it's usually something that sticks with you. It can become unhealthy though. Sometimes if you're channeling if you're not feeling your best and choosing to hyperfixate or like focus on that character, it can kind of mess with your head and you'll start channeling some of the negative parts of that character.
Okay, like what would that look like?
You might let me try and get my thoughts in order.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the example I was going to use was from a friend who is a fictive and not a fiction kin.
Okay.
But
I'm digging all the nuance in the terminology.
Yeah, but I know that I found, for me at least, with characters who have like difficulty expressing their emotions or find it's easier to express their emotions through anger or not express them at all, I will kind of absorb that part of them and become either angry or almost completely unfeeling for the amount of time that I hyperfixate or focus on having that character as a part of me. Okay. So you need to find it can be difficult, but eventually you will need to find a healthy balance, otherwise it might destroy you from the inside out.
So it's kind of like the opposite happening of like, oh, I like this character's sense of humor and I feel insecure about my sense of humor, so I want to like kind of channel and work their sense of humor into this. It's like, well, I'm working in their negative coping mechanisms or all of their like bad personality, not bad, but like negative personality traits. Okay, that makes sense so far.
And I've got a little story about my kinning journey. For example, when I realized that I was a fiction kin of the character Dobby from My Hero Academia, I realized it because of some of the experiences that we share. They aren't exactly the same, but emotionally they're similar. Like, I'm trans, and he literally destroyed his body and took away his identity in order to create something new and someone else. And I, as a trans person, definitely feel that destroying the old part of me in order to create someone and something new. Obviously, for him, it was a negative experience, and for me, it was a more positive one, but
it was still an emotionally charged destruction and rebirth kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes a way to realize you're a fiction kin is by having memories of being that character. I have a lot of... They can come in different ways. Sometimes they will feel like vivid actual memories, and sometimes they'll feel like things that I imagine, and I'm like, oh, wait, that actually happened. So it can sometimes be like... they can sometimes just form in the form of memories just popping up in your brain, and other times they can come in the form of thinking of something and be like, wait, that actually happened to me in this thing in my brain, whether it's spiritual or because of neurodiversity or mental illness or whatnot. Then there's kinshifts. Kinshifts usually happen with people who are fiction kin or under the fiction kin umbrella. It is where you get shifted more into that character's headspace and connect more with being that character's identity than you do with being what would technically be your own.
That seems like it could go back into the like when it becomes unhealthy type thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've definitely had times where I was feeling down and I connected into a character's headspace and it made it even worse.
And I could see how that would be like appealing, I suppose, and then just realizing that it is absolutely not that.
Yeah, it definitely can happen like like that. So, like I said, you do need to strike up a healthy balance, despite how hard it can be. It obviously will take time. You gotta take time to be able to figure out how to create a healthy balance, like you do with all other things. But eventually, once you do, it's a rewarding and incredible experience.
I guess
what I found.
I guess one of my questions would be like, how does one strike a balance if it's like not a choice?
It's something that can be both. For example, kin shifts. They're something that can be both. It's not necessarily a choice, but you can do things to spur them on, and you can do things to disconnect yourself from them. Like if you want to be in one, you can indulge yourself in that piece of character's media, or like specific stuff that is like kind of specific to that character. And if you want to do something else, maybe indulge yourself in something that's like the character doesn't like, or like.
Oh, okay, so that like disconnects you from being in whatever headspace that you've been in.
Yep.
I suppose it's just like anything else, right?
Yeah.
Like if I ate too much ice cream, I probably won't buy ice cream for a couple weeks or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm. It can come in multiple forms. There's different reasons why you might realize you're a fiction kin. For me, it's both a spiritual thing as well as a neurodiversity thing. I am definitely a fiction kin for some characters in a spiritual way and others in a neurodiverse way because I'm hyperfixating on them, and that can go hand in hand with being a fiction flicker, which is where your kins flicker in and flicker out at times. Right,
that makes sense. Like I've always I have an encyclopedic knowledge of the X-Files and it's one of my comfort shows, but like it does come in and out where I'm like I'll be like, oh, I haven't watched that in a while, oh, whatever, but then I'll watch it and I'll be like, well, I've just binged all 9 original seasons in a week, and read several commentarial texts and academic studies on how it changed the landscape of long-form storytelling on primetime television or something, and then I'll just forget about it for like a month and a half or something.
There are different ways that you can find it. It can be a reason of different timelines, different universes, spiritual connection with your soul. It can also be because of neurodiversity and hyperfixations. It can be because of mental illness and needing a connection to something, so your brain formulates a connection to a character in order to help you to cope.
And I can definitely see how that part could be cathartic or helpful, right? Like if like you don't feel like your experiences are being mirrored by the people around you, like there's a number of other experiences that can be either escapism or mirror your experience, or that aren't part of that world, and then you don't have to interact with but like you don't have to experience the mental exhaustion that sometimes comes with socializing when you're, I don't know, in like an episode of whatever you're having.
I've definitely found for me with my mental struggles that it's been helpful to try to connect myself to different characters in order to kind of cope.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
There's definitely different spaces to talk about it. Social media is a big one. I found places like TikTok and like blog websites like Tumblr are really good places to talk about stuff like that, because TikTok, you can create accounts dedicated to it with short form videos and communications in the comments, and on spaces like Tumblr or other blog websites, you can create a blog dedicated to stuff like that where you write down the stuff that you've experienced and people can connect with it, and it's just a really nice place to be able to connect as well as stay safe when doing this. But Discord for Fiction Kin can also be a really good space. Do your research first, though. Discord is not necessarily a safe place.
That is probably a good warning for viewers. I mean, I probably think like anything that helps you find community can probably be good, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Unless it's an unsafe space where for other reasons it's putting you in like mental, physical, or emotional distress.
Right.
It's not a good place to stay, which is why, and it happens too much on Discord, which is why I say stay safe when using Discord.
On Discord. So it happens disproportionately on Discord over other platforms?
I would say just because it's a direct communication app.
Right, whereas Tumblr, you're writing and people are responding. Discord is like direct, real time.
And you can kind of, it's easier to kind of channel the comments and see what you want people to see and what you want to block, and it can just be harder with direct messaging.
That makes sense. actually.
Other nerdy spaces are good places like conventions or like live action role playing groups or just other tabletop role playing groups are, I found, really good places because you can find people who maybe who might not understand your experiences but also enjoy like nerdy stuff and different stuff. So they might be able to not necessarily understand what you've gone through, but have been able to, or what you have gone through and are going through, but might be able to understand the concept of like just being different, as well as I've found like spiritual connection-y stuff at conventions, for example, and it's really cool because like you can talk to people who have more of a connection to the spiritual side of things.
No, that makes sense too, especially because like my experience in like TTRPG groups or even some sort of like reading groups, book club type things, whereas like I guess even if they don't understand what you're talking about specifically, or like I don't know, the experiences that you've had in the world, they do understand what it is to like things really intensely, and maybe have been ostracized for that.
Yeah.
Less so now, like D&D is kind of cool,
Yeah.
things like that, but even if they don't like, oh, I understand what these words mean, they can sort of be really accepting of people who like things very, very intensely.
Mm-hmm. The last note I have is, do not go on system spaces, DID, OSDD, stuff like that. Do not go into their spaces and talk about your experiences with being a fiction kin as if they're the same. They're not. DID and OSDD are traumagenic disorders that are created from intense trauma in childhood to the point where the brain splits off from itself. It's not necessarily, oh, I had some mental struggle, so I like this character and now I identify as them being a part of me. It's quite different, and it's not your space to talk. I've definitely seen people systems complaining about fiction kin invading their spaces. I'm totally on their side. Fiction kin should not be in their spaces, as then this is coming from a singlet and a fiction kin. You should not be invading system spaces. It's just not your place to talk. If you know people who are systems who are open to talking about it, that's fine, but don't go into a system space expecting that is your place to talk.
That makes sense, and that's probably a fair warning. Like I like the etiquette slant you have on it too, because it's not just like, oh, you've realized something and now you just go bull in a china shop with your interest and do the thing. That makes sense, right? Because like I know that when I'm learning a new thing, often don't know the etiquette around it and can come across as accidentally rude or accidentally I don't know, maybe insensitive.
Yeah.
So that's awesome that you have sort of these rules around the space too.
Yeah. There are always different sides to communities, and I wouldn't have said it so sternly if it weren't for the fact that people have tried speaking calmly and like trying to understand, and people just don't listen.
Right.
So I don't usually agree with this, but like sometimes the only way to get someone to listen is like tough love.
Yeah.
Because like if they're not going to understand any other way, and this is something that can actively be annoying or even harming people who have already had difficult experiences, it's something important. It's not something you can just go about willy-nilly ignoring, and it pisses me off when people do.
Right, and that'll probably harm both communities,
yeah,
right?
It gives fiction kin a bad reputation, and you don't want to be partially responsible for fiction kin having a bad reputation,
right,
more than they already do.
Okay, so do they have a bad reputation already? Did you say more than they already do?
Kind of, yeah. People don't like them. Like, they're like, oh, you're weird, you think you're a fictional character, especially with Therians, which are people who are spiritually connected to animals.
Okay.
People...
That seems like there'd be less pushback against that than like a fictional character to me.
There's like equal amounts with both.
Okay.
But especially with Therians, I found people are like, oh my gosh, you think you're an animal, you probably use a litter box in the bathroom and eat dog food.
Well, I hope they stretched before all of those mental gymnastics they just did.
Yeah. The people are stupid. and don't actually put in the time to even listen before saying stupid stuff.
So that's probably another etiquette thing, right? Like if you are in these spaces and new to these spaces, you probably want to listen before you go barrel-assing in.
Yeah, do not think that you know more than the system or the people running the space do.
Makes sense.
Because you don't.
Does that also go for, like, if you are new to a Fictionkin space, should you kind of sit back and listen and see what terminology is happening and like find, you know, before just running in and talking about stuff?
I would say, yeah, it's less likely to happen especially if you're a new Fictionkin in a Fictionkin space than if you're a Fictionkin in, for example, a system space.
Okay.
But because, like, it's not your community, instead of it, for example, if it's like your space, if you're a Fictionkin, it's a Fictionkin space, it's less likely to have, like, backlash, I guess. But
so I guess, like, it's like if it's in a system space, it would be actively rude and harmful, whereas in a, like, new Fictionkin, I guess is the term, in a Fictionkin space, it would just maybe come across as a little bit rude and zealous.
Yeah.
Okay.
But not even. A lot of Fictionkin are really open because the community is, like, I wouldn't say it's necessarily, it's just not necessarily completely accepted.
Okay.
And so, I wouldn't say it's marginalized or anything like that, but people just think it's weird. So, I'd say people are, like, usually totally open to, like, letting people in, teaching people the information they need to know. And, like, I've just found it's a really great space to talk about your experiences. Obviously, don't go, like, trauma dumping on why you're a Fictionkin or whatever, like.
Right.
But
that probably goes for, like, across the board anyways.
Absolutely. But
don't go trauma dumping on the internet. Purple Room
Yes.
Podcast. Is there anything you want to add before we wrap up? I have learned a lot today.
Just, like, if you think you are, do your research, embrace your identity, and be crazy.
Yeah.
Like, have fun with it.
Right? Like, there's nothing wrong with being weird. If people think it's weird, that's a them problem. Yep. You're having a great time.
Exactly.
And that's the Purple Room Podcast, y'all.